My name's Annemarie. I'm a grateful, recovered addict. And I will start off by saying thank you to the convention committee for asking me and allowing me to share the message, allowing me to impart my recovery and thus further my recovery. Also, thank you for organizing this convention. It's amazing that it's been 20 years of CA here in Lethbridge. So right on for that, keeping it alive. And thank you to everyone here for sharing your recovery. If we could please start with, you don't have to join in with me, but the set-aside prayer. Higher power, please help me to set aside everything I think I know about myself. The 12 steps, the big book, the meetings, my disease, and you, God, so I may have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please let me see the truth. Also note that anything that I share is just my opinion. I'm not very good at quoting the big book directly, and I make mistakes. So I may say things that are incorrect. I will say things that you disagree with, and that's okay. I'm starting to understand that I am neither right or wrong. We're all just learning. So, yeah, I am an addict. It's my understanding that I was born that way. It's not like I went through trauma or abandonment issues, although I did, and that those made me an addict. I was simply born that way with a predisposition. And I came to understand that the disease of addiction is in me in a physical sense and a mental sense. In the physical sense, I cannot take a substance into me and control my use of it, at least not every time. And in the mental sense, I can quit for a period of time, and I'll know that I don't ever want to use again because of how bad it gets and how I get suicidal and shit just gets dirty. But then I start coming up with these reasons and they sound really good, and all of a sudden I'm using again, even though I know how painful the withdrawal is going to be. And I've come to understand that that's the insanity. And so the disease exists in two parts, the physical nature and the mental nature, the obsession. And as a result, I was spiritually ill. And that spiritual sickness, actually, it was present, the signs of it were present really, really early on. I mean, as I was a cute little kid. I was really cute. I had ringlets, and I'm sure I wasn't a brat, but apparently I used to run around the clubhouse. My mom used to fly glider planes, and I used to run around the clubhouse draining all the beer bottles that were around. And I was a toddler at the time, and I don't remember that, but they thought it was really cute. But as soon as I started getting into socializing with people around my age, not adults, apparently I didn't know what to do. I hadn't learned whatever it was that everybody seemed to know. I felt that I didn't fit in. And you hear this again and again and again in people's stories. And I'm no exception. I'm not any different. I'm not special, and I'm not unique, and sorry, neither are you. We all share similar traits. And that's that feeling of not quite fitting in, having to wear a mask, at some point in time, wishing we could numb it all out, wishing we could unplug our emotions, wanting to just merge completely with one person, wanting someone else to fix all our problems or wanting to fix all of theirs. Whatever you want to call it, all of that was a manifestation of the spiritual part of the disease, the fact that my ego was so present from early on. I was completely self-involved. And that's because I was constantly in survival mode, because I was terrified. I was terrified that, that we look at that actually in the step 4 inventory, or actually in the part of how it works where it talks about step 4. we look at our basic instincts. So our basic social instincts, which are, for emotional security, companionship, friendships, etc. We also look at our security instinct, which includes the material, so a roof over our head and money and food, as well as emotional security and our ambitions, and then our sex instinct, which is our natural, inborn desire to reproduce. And we go a little wonky with those. For some reason, we fear that we are not going to survive when something isn't met to our satisfaction. And we have zero faith that it's going to happen. And so we step in with all that fear and we try to take control, and that's exactly what I would do. I always had, every year at school I had one new best friend and one new enemy. And I'd go through all that control and manipulation and insanity. And then once my boobies popped, well, then I just, I started using men. And I started manipulating in that way. I think we all have similar parts to our story in that sense. We may have different parts to our story in terms of what we used when and how. We may have different parts to our story in terms of how we got caught, or if we did get caught, and what the consequences were. But when I talk about the bottom sufficient to my recovery, I'm talking about a spiritual bottom. Because the time when I OD'd, that wasn't enough. One could think that that's a physical bottom, momentary death. It was the spiritual bottom that I needed to hit to become in any way willing enough to recognize that my ego ain't got this. I ain't got this. But that took a long time. The very first time that I actually went to a 12-step meeting, I was 18 years old. And, things hadn't gotten crazy unmanageable, not visibly anyways, just internally. And I went to this 12-step meeting. I cried the whole way through. They gave me a big book, and I left, and I was like, I don't think that's for me. On top of that, my mom told me I was overreacting, and my therapist told me I was being melodramatic. So I just relied on therapy. I relied on people. I relied on self-knowledge to try and help me out over the years that came. And actually, everything that I had learned in therapy and through self-help books and from people is what I eventually brought into my experience of meetings. So that when I eventually was pushed into 12-step meeting rooms again, when things got even worse and I got even more suicidal, I treated the 12-step meetings as if they were group therapy and as if it was self-help. And so whenever I went, I would go late because they always did those same readings at the beginning. And I would leave early because I didn't want to really talk to anybody because you're not my people. And there were so many blocks that I had in place. But you know what? I didn't know any better. And unfortunately, there wasn't anyone who was willing to give me a really firm kick in the ass and say, shut the fuck up and listen. These are the 12 steps. This is what you need. And so I didn't know, and I wasn't willing to find out. And so whenever I shared about where I was at. I shared about what I was feeling, because that's what I knew. I somehow managed to string together I guess I took 4 years at one point, but I think I probably only had about a year and a quarter of real recovery, because I didn't realize that I had started relapsing before I finally admitted it. I had only I thought I had finished working step 3, and the way that I had been going through the steps at that time, it really was working through the steps. answering a gazillion questions, about 69 questions for step 1 when in fact there are only 2. Answering a whole bunch of questions for step 2 when, in truth, I later found out I didn't need to actually understand a higher power in order to come to a place where I was willing to believe that I could be restored to sanity by it. And so I was under these ideas that recovery and working the steps was going to be a lot of work, and it is, but that it was very slow, and that I could take my time, and that all of this drama and insanity and unmanageability that was going on in my life, that was going to be for my therapist to help me with. So anyways, like I said, I didn't realize I'd been relapsing. So just to let you know, most of my story is going to be about after that relapse period, because that's where I learned the most. That's where I was humiliated the most. And about the period after that. Yeah, I didn't realize that if it wasn't my prescription, I wasn't really supposed to be taking it. I didn't realize that it was a weird thing to wait until my partner had left the house and then try and find out where he had hidden his stash, and kind of like searching every single corner of the house to find it, and then hoarding some and not telling him about it. I didn't realize that was odd, or maybe, a relapse. And so I stopped going to the meetings after that. Because that was just where I was going to tell people how I felt. Anyways, I don't know, and I was just talking about this with someone, I don't know why I got it when I finally got it. I don't know what was different. I don't know why I finally fully, wholeheartedly admitted to my innermost self that I was powerless over the disease. Sure, I can say it's because I had tried so many other methods and I kept failing. I could say it's because I was desperate. The only satisfactory answer I have is that it's because I hit my spiritual bottom. I hit, at that point, every excuse that I could find and had used it up. And I finally was ready to say, I don't know. And that's when I got the knowledge. That's when I became willing to get the knowledge, the facts about the disease of addiction. Because I can't go any further until I have an understanding of the nature of the disease. I can't address the problem if I don't know what the problem is. So I admitted I had the problem. I knew it was physical, I knew it was mental, and I knew my ego, myself, my mind, were not going to help. Because a sick mind cannot heal a sick mind. The whole God thing, though. So who here has had trouble with the whole God thing? Almost everyone. And that's not abnormal. Sure, we may have been exposed to the idea of a higher power when we're younger, and some of us perhaps had the benefit of a positive experience with it, so it's not as difficult. But that doesn't mean that you already have faith. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Meaning that we wouldn't have been in the disease of addiction if you'd already had that faith. I'd been to Catholic school. I'd been, taught by nuns. I'd been told I was bad, fundamentally bad. And, I'd been raised in all of that shame, and I believed it. And so this idea that, first of all, that I could be restored to sanity, I wasn't too sure. But the idea that a higher power would want anything to do with me, I wasn't too sure about that either. which is when I came to the understanding that this higher power is not constrained by any human characteristics. I was totally used to making other people my higher power, making my therapists my higher power, making one of my parents my higher powers, making my partner my higher power. Of course, they all have flaws. They will disappoint me. But a real higher power is by definition beyond that which I can know, understand, or relate to. And that's when the whole concept of unconditional acceptance came in. I was like, okay, well, if it's unconditional, then I guess I'll slip right through. I'll just glide right in under that condition. And the funny thing is that when I became willing just to even believe in that mild possibility that it has worked for many other people, and so maybe, possibly it could work for me, maybe, tentatively, and that I was going to give this a shot, I was going to do this, so I made that decision. I am not going to be God anymore. That was the decision that I had to make in step 3. I am not going to be God anymore. And then continued with the action of the work. That is when things began to shift, very slightly. It's through the work of step 4, the first time around, I gained very little insight, very little understanding of step 4. I felt uplifted after going through it. I did my amends all wrong. I didn't do step 10 and 11, and I didn't know how to do 12. But I was open-minded, and I began to learn. And then I did do step 12. And it was by doing step 12 that I learned more about step 4 and 5. It was by doing step 12 that I learned more about the meaning of step 6 and 7. It was by doing step 12 with yet another person that I learned what an amend is supposed to look like. And it was by doing step 12 that I learned the extreme importance of steps 10 and 11. Because I wasn't practicing what I was teaching. I would get to a point in the book that I was reading with a woman, and I'd be like, oh, well, yeah, that's something that's bothering me too. And then I'd start involving that in my life. I'd start practicing that. You know how it says, we hear this one day at a time? To me, that does not apply to my use of any substances. I cannot use for the rest of my life. I'm not going to take that one day at a time. I have come to terms with the fact I have grieved that loss. And I'm okay with it, because I no longer have the obsession. The thing that I do one day at a time is my spiritual growth. My steps 10, 11, and 12, I work one day at a time. Every day. So how I keep track of the character defects as they show themselves again and again. The way that I am slowly having this conscious contact with some higher power that I still don't understand, don't expect I ever will, that's one day at a time. And it's still growing. And even the way that I sponsor women has grown and changed. When I started, it would take months to get a woman through the steps, and now it can take as little as 4 hours. And then we work through them again. And then we might work through them again. My understanding of what I am looking at in terms of the character defects now, at the beginning, I'll go back to the beginning. At the beginning, I thought, okay, well, I've got this character defect, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and bingo. It was, and everybody has different character defects, and I have to watch for this one now, and that one I'll work on later. And I'm working on this one now, yeah. I think I'll read this book to help me with this character defect. So my understanding of it has changed through continued study of the Big Book, continued attendance at meetings, and listening to the message, listening to the higher power's message through other people, and through working with sponsees. There's at most 5 character defects, and that's it. We have complicated the hell out of this program. If I only need to look for 5 things, if I only need to stay aware of these things, and I mean, it's really only 4, it's going to be much simpler, isn't it? But if I come up with a whole bunch of synonyms for the character defects, well, I have now found a great excuse for not really staying on top of it, for not really remaining aware of it. Oh, it's too overwhelming. So, what are the character defects? Selfishness, self-seeking based in fear, dishonesty, and lack of consideration. I also need to keep an eye out for resentments, because they are going to point me in the direction of a character defect. They're based in a character defect. So I'll say them again. Selfishness, dishonesty, self-seeking based in fear, and lack of consideration. How am I going to become aware of these things? Now, these are not bad things in and of themselves, because let's think about it. Honesty without compassion is just plain brutality. So having too much honesty, that's not necessarily a good thing. But having too little honesty, now we have a character defect. Thinking of myself in order to ensure my survival, so selfishness, that's not a bad thing. That's keeping me alive. But thinking only of myself at the expense of others, now it's becoming a character defect. So, and I can go on for the other ones, but you start to get the picture that we are taking things to extremes because of our fear. And I don't know about what other people's experiences are, but my personal fear, the one that all the other fears boil down to, and the one that I've discovered is existing for every other woman that I've worked with, the fear of dying alone. The fear of not mattering, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of being alone, being unloved, and thus we stop existing. I mean, it can always be boiled down to that at the root. And so we do whatever we can to run away from that, try and control the situation so that doesn't happen. But you want to know a secret? Once I stop fighting that fear and engage in faith, and I do the actions asked of me in step 12, I'm not alone. I'm working with a sponsee. I'm connected with a fellowship. I'm thinking of others. I am not isolated from my true nature or from people because of ego anymore. Because that's what ego's going to do. Self-will, ego, I use them interchangeably. Self-will cuts me off. It isolates me because it's only me. I'm so limited in what I can know of the world that when I'm in self-will, I'm bound to screw up. I'm bound to piss other people off. I'm bound to make a mistake. I don't have the full knowledge. And I'm probably going to end up all by myself because everyone's pissed me off and I'm the only one that I can predict to an extent. But when I get beyond that, when I acknowledge, when I lean into I don't know, and I'm okay not knowing, that's when the world starts cropping up. That's when I start feeling a connection with fellow human beings and actually learning things. That's when I come out of this prison, or the bondage of self as it's talked about in the big book. That's when I can feel the presence of this power that is definitely more powerful than my finite self, working through other people, working through group conscience, working through everything. I don't try to define my higher power, but I do have faith in it. And just the fact that I can have this faith is a miracle in and of itself, because I have the brain of a scientist. I need proof. I'm also a psychologist. So I'm all about like self-help and using this intervention and doing this thing. So the fact that I do have faith, it still kind of shocks me. Faith goes beyond the belief, though. And the only reason that I have the belief is because I had the willingness. So I started off with willingness. I made a decision based on belief, and then I engaged in action. That action led me to a spiritual awakening. And that spiritual awakening led me to want to engage in even more action, and that action is what grows faith. Anne, Dr. Bob's wife, her favorite saying was, "Faith without works is dead." And absolutely. Just like the step 3 decision means nothing if you don't go through with the rest of the steps, a belief in a higher power means nothing if you don't act on that belief. And I was reading a passage earlier today about some guys tending a garden, and someone else is passing by, and this guy's St. Francis. He's tending his garden, and someone says, "Oh, St. Francis, you must have prayed so much to have such a beautiful garden." To which he says, "Yes, and each time I prayed, I picked up my hoe." And he doesn't mean like, "Hey, my hoe." He means like the garden rake, right? And that you got to use the action. Otherwise, it means nothing. Another important lesson that I learned, and all of these lessons I learned through mistakes, through humiliation, because I had been in pride and in self-will. And I go back there every now and again, daily. I think we all do. The next thing that I learned is that when I'm connecting with this higher power that I have faith in and building a faith with, I don't ask for anything. I don't actually say anything. Because as soon as I say something, as soon as I try to formulate a question or pray for something, I'm dictating. I'm getting back into that director role. I'm actually just praying on my own self-will. And that's useless. And I'm not saying don't pray or don't ask for things. But if I think something is supposed to happen a certain way, well, now I know again. And that's a problem. In order to stay in recovery and not slip back into the bondage of self, which feeds the obsession, which will lead me back to wanting to use drugs to get away from myself and my misery, in order to prevent that, to stop that from happening, I need to stay in I don't know. And that's really hard. The world we live in isn't built for I don't know. Heck, our business meetings aren't even really built for I don't know. But funnily enough, it's actually in service that I learned the most about my character defects. So a few years ago, we were planning the first convention, the first area convention in 10 years, the first weekend-long one, after the split of the Alberta area into north and south. Excuse me. And I had no clue what I was doing. And so my ego came out to play. A lot. I was easily offended. I took things personally. I wanted things to be a specific way. I thought people should be doing things a certain way. It bothered me when they didn't. And now these are all aspects of self-will. These are all I know positions. And man, did I have resentments. See, I believe in the traditions. I believe in Robert's Rules of Order. I believe in service and understanding how to deliver that service. And if someone asks me to explain how I have come to understand it, I will help them learn how I have come to understand it based on knowledge, based on previous knowledge and experience. But I have one, thank you, but I appreciate it. My way isn't the only way. I can't control what someone else is going to do. I don't want to be arrogant enough to decide what's right or wrong. I just know what it is that I can intuitively feel is the next thing that I can do to be of maximum service. Not about right or wrong. Just the next thing that I can do to be of maximum service. I look to the traditions to understand that. I look to the steps to get a greater understanding, to guide me to that insight. The whole point of the program is to help us towards that insight, that connection with that infinite source within us, our higher power. That's the whole purpose, by the way. It's not about getting clean. That's just a happy byproduct. And so, as soon as I start getting into that place, and I go there often, of judging that a person is right or wrong, I am going back into self-will. That's okay. I'm not going to be perfect. I am human. I am not my higher power. And I accept my flaws. I'm going to do the most that I can to minimize any damage that those do to anyone else. I'm going to do the most that I can to be of maximum service to others, to be that clear conduit. And so I do those, I practice step 10 throughout the day, every day. It's not just at the end of the day, a quick inventory. No, it's all day, throughout the day is how we do step 10. And usually a pretty good indicator of when the spot check needs to be done is when I feel one of those emotions. That's where feelings come into this program. They're flags. See, when I'm working someone through the steps and we do step 4, it's not about tell me more about your childhood trauma. It's not about tell me more about your fears and let me understand them. It's not about I'm going to love you until you love yourself. It's, okay, these are the people you're pissed off at. They don't know, and they don't care. You're going to have to get to a point where you accept that. Life doesn't care about you. I accept that. I do know that I am of great worth and value when I am not in myself. I do know that I can give great caring and support to others when I am not in myself. And that in itself is the reward, that I can be giving. That's my purpose. That's why I'm alive. And that's why I'm not dying of the disease of addiction today. As soon as an emotion comes up, it's probably a signal that I'm afraid. Okay? Which basic instinct is it? Okay, I can't do anything about that. I'm not in control of my basic instincts. I can't even really remove my character defects, but there appears to be a desire to be dishonest. See, the character defects are not our actions. The things that we do that we are going to make amends for back in step 9, those are results of our character defects. So when a character defect comes up, before I act on it, I want to be aware of it so I can act in the opposite way. Simple, right? So as soon as I have that feeling that's probably related to fear that alerts me to a character defect at play, I'm going to be like, oh, there's that self-seeking based in fear. Okay. Well, I'm going to go be of service to someone else. I'm going to go talk to someone about their day, see how they're doing. Or I'm going to call a sponsee, see how she's doing. I'm not going to call someone and tell them how I'm feeling, because that's just me engaging in, I know the way that I do it, is engaging in self-pity. And that's another part of selfish behavior and self-seeking. And so instead, I may admit, oh yeah, I'm in fear right now. In fact, that's part of the step 10. I'm admitting it to God, to myself, and to another person. Yeah, I'm in fear. And I'm wanting to act on that and control some shit and get attention. So how are you? What can I help you with? I'm dumbing it down. Step 11 then on a daily basis is where I get the heck out of the way as soon as I wake up. I remind myself of my intent and then open the channel. It's like I'm turning on the two-way radio. I made that decision in step 3 to give up my will, so I better do it in step 11. So I'm going to do that every day. And what is the insight that almost always comes as a result of that? Do step 12. Be of service. Practice the principles in all your affairs. And they don't mean extramarital affairs. They mean all the things that you're engaged in, all the areas of your life. Recovery isn't just about not using. Recovery is about living. When I was 5 years old, I desperately wanted a manual for life because I had no clue how to live it. In fact, I didn't want to. I kept a journal tracking how long I could strangle myself before I chickened out. Because even at 5, I knew I wanted to die. There was something fundamentally wrong with me. When I got this book at the age of 18, I didn't recognize it for what it was. I didn't realize that it was a design for living. I thought it was something like the Bible or one of those books that people carry around like Fools and Thump and believe abjectly in, and oh my God, they must be idiots. I had some preconceived notions. And so I continued to live my life based on what I thought was right, and I was miserable. I wasn't living, I was dying. It's when I accepted that there is a very simple solution in this book, that is a solution that will bring you to a spiritual awakening, because this is a spiritual disease, and that there's a very simple way to get there, that if practiced on a daily basis, will become a little bit easier, or at least a little less hard, because we're fighting against our self-will every day. It's there. I mean, we're given self-will, we're given choice, we're given our ability to think. We just don't have the luxury of indulging in it indiscriminately. So I can't. Once I realized this design for living could actually guide me through any circumstance in life, life became something I wanted to do, something I wanted to be involved in. And the way that I'm involved in it now, I absolutely adore. The work that I do is tough. I do sponsor quite a few women as well. I have quite a few service positions. And I keep very busy. And I'm exhausted physically and mentally, but not spiritually. Somehow, when I don't think that I can do any more, and more is asked of me, somehow it's possible. I'm dragging my body, feeding caffeine to my mind, Because it's not me doing it, I'm just keeping the channel open. I'm fulfilling my primary purpose. And I'm extremely grateful to be able to do that. I don't want to do anything else. I don't ever want to return to the way of living, thinking, or being that I had before. Where just the idea of walking a block without something to numb me out terrified me. The idea of someone seeing who I really was on the inside terrified me. Because I was a monster on the inside. But working through these steps and discovering the nature of the disease and the character defects, those 4 little character defects, and the pattern that they play out in my past and in my present, has revealed to me that there is no monster. That was the insanity. It was shame. But there is no monster. I simply am. I'm not good or bad. I'm just a fucking addict. A recovered addict, looking to be of service. Not good or bad, not right or wrong, but alive, and doing the best I can, with the help of my higher power. I'm sure that I'm going to think of something that I wanted to say, but I'm not thinking of it now. So I'm going to take that as intuition that I said what I needed to say today, and I hope that someone heard what they needed to hear. I look very much forward to simply enjoying the rest of the convention and seeing every single person in this room get involved in service. Yay! Thank you.